So welcome to our online audience for our pre-concert events. And this is Susan Reed speaking. I'm the principal keyboard player with the Anchorage Symphony. And Elizabeth and I are going to chat a little bit about the upcoming February concert, end of the month. And boy, is it a humdinger. There's a lot of concert and a lot of great music. So first off, we have to start with the overture because it's just so delightful and uplifting. The Thieving Magpie by Rossini. And I believe this is a first for the symphony program to have it played.
I think for a symphony program, it's possible that they have played it for youth concerts before.
Yeah, but not on a
my
class.
Understanding. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's how, yeah.
So as you were putting the concert together, what led you to decide the Magpie would be the way to start?
Well, this was a piece that was requested by one of our players, and you'll probably hear that player play at the very beginning of the piece. But this was a particular request from a player to Randy, and Randy promised that he program it. And so in keeping with Randy's promise, I'm happy to include it this season. And I thought it actually would work really well in pairing it with Beethoven, because Beethoven admired Rossini so much, and they were contemporaries, and they were the hottest composers of their time, basically, in their fields. There was no one greater, and no one, I mean, they're so completely different at the same time. But they're responding to historic events and other things in different ways, and so and in similar ways as well. So I just thought, well, let's put them together. Anyway, Thieving Magpie, might against right, nature playing a big trick on all of man's lawful efforts to control the environment. It's all about the loss of a silver spoon that a magpie has taken from a very wealthy lady. She blames the wrong person. A lot of stuff happens. And the poor little maid who is accused literally goes to the gallows and is on the verge of being executed for something she didn't do. And then the magpie shows up to steal something else, and everyone realizes what's happened. They go to the nest, and they find the silver spoon, and they realize that all has been mistaken. And luckily, at the very end, everyone's saved, and the young maid gets to marry the son of the rich lady, and it all works out. But in Needle, it is a commentary on laws, on assumptions, on mistaken, not so much identity, but assumptions that one, classism, all of those things that were going on, the rise of the middle class, and their responsibility as rulers, the rise of the middle class that had servants now, and their responsibilities and sometimes their foibles, and they weren't very different from the royals that had done the same thing in operas and other things before. So it's amazing that it got through the censors, actually, because I really think it's quite a condemnation in some ways of mankind's assumption of ruling over nature, and nature always getting the last word, and in a funny way too. So, but there's a lot going on, and the overture is brilliant, and it starts out with military. It starts out with the law, grand introduction, and with the drums, snare drums. Military drums, not really snare drums, military drums, calling to each other. That the troops are being called forth, and maybe the march to the guests is the first thing we hear. So we think of it as this delightful, fabulous, brilliant piece, but actually the worst thing that happens in the opera is exactly what we hear at the beginning. But it is a comedy. I mean, it's a Singspiel or a melodrama with comic elements, of course. The poor little girl is pursued by the mayor of the noblesse oblige, the mayor who assumes that he can have his way with this young girl, and he'll set her free if she succumbs. and comedy within it. And there's of course they're making fun of people in charge and showing their foibles. And I think it's easier to fault a local mayor than it would be the king or the local aristocrat who probably was watching the opera from the box. So we start there, and then we get into this fabulous, brilliant run of triplets by the violins with intermittent accents, and you get an agitato feeling, the breathlessness of it, the worry, the scurry, all of that we think of in Rossini, which is the fast, brilliant passage work that he writes for the orchestra. And indeed, that's here. This is a tour de force for orchestra, no question about it. It's hard as heck, and yes. And yet it falls in the hands very well. I mean, he knew the instruments, he knew the orchestra very well. By 1817, when written, he was well into his maturity and his popularity. He was perhaps at the height of his popularity at this moment. And
he wrote
considered,
four operas the year he wrote this one.
I mean, yeah. Oh. Yeah. But he was a Mozartian genius that way. It just melody poured out of him, and that's why we always look to Italian. I mean, the melody is supersedes everything in some ways in Italian opera. The bel canto, the singing cantabile line, and that's what attracted Mozart so much to Italian. I mean, Mozart is a very Italian sort in comparison to, say, Beethoven, who's more a French composer, but not necessarily Italian. Tries to be, but
Yeah. So we're off to the races with this wonderful, and we see magpies a bit in Alaska too, and
certainly do.
Yes, they can get a lot of trouble. So
they can. I saw one yesterday on my walk on the coastal trail, and there was one that just hopped up on a fence, and it had something in its mouth, and I said, "What do you have in your mouth?" And it sort of showed me, and then flipped away. I mean, it just I just felt like, aha. It's a sign.
Take it as such. So that's great. So we have there's Randy's mark is on this concert in another way, which is a commission that he was so excited about, having worked with Rachel Barton Pine in the past, and then she approached him about the Billy Childs Consortium to commission a piece that we would never have been able to afford to commission on our own. But by working with other orchestras, we were able to be a part of that process. And now we actually get the second performance. And it was just done weeks ago for the first time. Again, COVID intervened. But the music of our time was really important to Randy Fleischer. And so it's a bittersweet but wonderful celebration that we're bringing this to life on Saturday and having you here to guide us through it. It's a complicated piece and so rich and deep and interesting. And so I just wanted to ask you, I know you've probably been part of multiple commissions in your career, but this one is particularly unique. Have you worked with Rachel before? Let's start.
Yes, several times. I've known her since she was a child. So in Chicago. So I have known of her from the time she was a young prodigy and performing regularly as a child with George Schulze and the Chicago Symphony. So she, her brilliance is well known to me, and her adventurousness in programming and her dedication to uncovering lost masterpieces, music by women, music by African-American composers. She is a pioneer and a fabulous, I guess, archaeologist in some ways, but also an advocate for voices of today as well. So, and she is, she's delving into early music as well. She plays Baroque violin. She can do everything. Frankly, she does everything, and she can do it. So it's a joy to have a chance to work with her again.
David Schrader, who's an organist. We were at Indiana University together, and we were friends when I was in grad school there. And it's just so cool to see that he's involved with Rachel all these years later. And just, again, she can play any style amazingly. But let's get into the Billy Child's exploration. This is actually the third piece that he's written for her. So they have an ongoing relationship, but it's the first concerto, I think. So the piece was done 2 weeks ago, and you had a very interesting story you shared with us about the premiere. I hadn't heard that, but something happened with the conductor.
Right, Michael Butterman, the executive director, the principal conductor, the music director of the Boulder Philharmonic, which gave the premiere, came down with COVID, and literally the assistant conductor had to learn the score in 24 hours and get to rehearsal. Eventually it was conducted by their guest conductor, but the first read through, I think, had to be run by the assistant conductor, who had to literally learn overnight a 38-minute concerto of intense difficulty, certainly in terms of quick tempos and what we call changing meters, which means that it's not a 4-square piece at all. And it's every measure has a different meter almost in the last movement, certainly. And some of them are hard because you have to go from 6 big beats to 3 small beats. And not even beats. Sometimes the beats are divided 2 + 2 + 3, or other organizational metrics, and it gives a certain energy and life to the piece. It's certainly jazzy, no question about it, in terms of that's normal to give us a feeling of spontaneity, of improvisation. And I did have a conversation with, by the way, the Boulder Philharmonic performance was wonderful. And, everyone came together, and they got through it gorgeously. And that's why I'm so excited and very confident that we'll have a wonderful performance here as well. But I would just say that I had a conversation with Billy the other day, and for about an hour, and he was likening the orchestra's role as, the left hand of a jazz pianist. So you're playing the harmonic underpinnings, you're commenting on, maybe some exclamation points on what's going on in the right hand, and Rachel's the right hand, the improvisatory, flights of fancy kind of role. And the piece kind of comes off that way in some ways too, as well. So it just feels like it unfolds as a giant improvisation from the opening, which is very heartfelt, almost like it reminds me, it's not really Bach-like, but there are aspects, the building block of a piece is presented at the beginning in a kind of, I don't know if it's ominous, but kind of ominous way. And then unfolds in 3 different pictures, emotional states. The first being about love, rejoicing, being happy. The second about remorse, and the third called resilience. So he wrote resilience first, and it was his reaction to the COVID situation, the political events of the day, everything that was going on in 2020. And by the way, it was supposed to be given its premiere in 2020, and Randy was, I know, looking forward to this. And both Rachel and Billy are just, so sad that they won't have that opportunity. We all are. So there is a poignancy to this, but also, resilience. I think it's a sign that, we must move forward, and the concerto has that as well.
Definitely. And I was exhilarated and overwhelmed a little after our first read through last Wednesday night. And I'm looking forward to getting to know the piece better now, and then adding Rachel's part to the left hand, so to speak. But it's a really rich piece, and I think there's just so much to experience with it. I think it's dense, but yet it's also opaque. It has so many colors in the orchestra that are just wonderful, and great use of instrumentation. I mean, it's just wow. So Yay, Billy, and yay,
I
Rachel.
agree. I think it's a stunning work. Ravishing is how I've been calling it. And it matches Rachel very well.
Yeah.
It highlights and explores all the kinds of technical virtuosity that she displays. It's being able to unfold a lyric line with great emotion, or pull off technical pyrotechnics, just double
Yes.
stops and quick notes and passage work. She's able to do all of it. And I think it really, it is a marvelous showcase for her as well.
Yes. And I'm glad our audiences will have a chance to experience some of Billy's music. He's really an important figure in American contemporary classical music as well as jazz. And
yes, I mean, he is a legend. He's a legend in his own time. And I think it would behoove everyone to explore more of his work. It's beautiful, really is. Yeah. So, and he does have feet in both worlds. You're right. He has extensive classical training, and it informs his jazz, and he has extensive jazz. He's a 5-time Grammy winner of his in jazz, and that informs his classical, and he seeks to blend both.
Yes.
The traditions of classical and the techniques, orchestration techniques and things like that, he brings to what are gestures that we would associate with jazz, like harmonic gestures or progressions, and also use of modes as opposed to major and minor. Jazz moves to modal work a lot. Yeah. And so we have that. And that modes are, a major and minor are modes. It just refers to scales that have different what would you call it, intervals between the notes. Instead of what we are normally expecting with a major or a minor key, we might have a note that's higher raised in a different relationship to another. And that gives an exotic feeling to the harmonies and new possibilities as well.
Yes. Well, I'm really excited for our audience to experience this. Only the second performance in the world, and it's the Anchorage Symphony. So,
and I just wanted to say 3 cadenzas. Interestingly, yeah. 2 of them in the last movement, if I'm not mistaken. The third movement starts with a cadenza, and then there's another cadenza as well. The second movement doesn't, but it's a long, beautiful, melancholy song in a way. Yeah.
No, it's going to be quite the adventure and the journey, an emotional journey. So, and a journey of. So, Randy, here's for you, and here's for Anchorage and Alaska and everybody who can experience another brand new work. I mean, we have to remember every work was new in its time. So at this point, it's a good opportunity to segue to the fact that Beethoven's Second Symphony was controversial when
absolutely. It was talk about new works. A writhing dragon that couldn't die, that wouldn't die.
That would not die. We hear it today and it's like, really? Seriously? That was said of this? But new works in their time. And this was shocking in terms of some of his new ideas for what would happen with an orchestra. So I just really
love it.
Billy Childs.
And I exactly. I mean, two works that, but I don't think that you'll find that Billy Child's work is a writhing dragon that refuses to die. No. It's quite different. But putting Beethoven second, it had more to do with the Magpie. In other words, the comedy of the Magpie. This is the Symphony Number 2 is one of the most theatrical of the symphonies, and it's filled with comedy. And a colleague of mine, someone I went to college, Christopher Gibbs, who's a musicologist, has written that he believes Beethoven turned to musical comedy when he was feeling his most tragic. And indeed, this is the moment of the Heiligenstadt testimony, the letter he wrote to his brothers, talking about the inevitability of his total deafness and his despair, but also his resolve to rise above it, be a hero, and fulfill God's plan, the heavens plan for him to write the music that he must write. And so even in this enormous realization and tragedy in terms of losing his hearing, I mean, my God, a musician losing their hearing, there can be nothing worse. He is writing this incredible piece that's all about laughter, guffawing laughter. I mean, you take a look at just the first page of the third movement. I went back to it, you know, when I was starting to study it again, and I just started laughing outright because it's just three little notes. The minuet, the scherzo. It's the first time it's called a scherzo, a joke, musical joke. It's just three notes, up and down, over and over again, and with a big guffaw, kind of, you know, it's funny as heck, and it's okay if you smile and chuckle. And I was just laughing and laughing, and then in the last movement, I mean, everything is just. There's another musicologist who's likened the last movement to bodily sounds, and that Beethoven was known to make fun of his own bodily sounds. Let's just say that. So I don't know if that's true, and I haven't found that in the history, but I think it's funny that, you know, it has that kind of blowing a raspberry in a way, or a little Till Eulenspiegel, a little imp is involved in that last movement, and lots of laughter. First movement starts grandly, very grandly, and in a French with the double nodding, but powerfully. And then all of a sudden, if you listen carefully to the first few notes of the oboe in its song in the introduction, it gets condensed into 4/16 notes, and you hear it in the violins in a kind of breathless a dance of some sort, or progression of some sort. So he is a master of taking something and disguising it right away, and developing it immediately, taking a small little chunk of music and then just using it to create entire vast epic proportions. And this symphony is also a long symphony. It's also about 38 minutes long, which is longer than most symphonies up to that point. Of course, not as long as the one he's going to write or had already thought about writing. It was the Eroica that came out a few years later. But it's one of my favorite. The second symphony is one of my favorite symphonies. I have a warm feeling toward all those even numbered symphonies, because I think that they bring out a different aspect of Beethoven, and they are always the result of his deep thoughts about compositional development. They're always on the way towards something, and in some ways, the second symphony has aspects of the ninth symphony in it. So you know that he goes back to these even number symphonies. So does the fourth. I mean, my goodness. And he these are deep wells that he can go back to and pull lots of great material from, and techniques and ideas from. So yeah, it's just a second movement, a beautiful song that just gets developed wonderfully and goes. It's a super long movement, and unless you keep a good pace, it can get bogged down. So you have to just allow the music to unveil, and almost relentlessly to keep it going, with some ebbs and flows, of course. But if you stop along the way to stare at something and contemplate, that's the end of it. It's not Mahler or Bruckner, where you can stop and smell the rose for a minute and then move on. You have to just let it happen to you. It's sort of like the pastoral, the scene by the brook, where the water keeps going, and your experience is to allow it to keep flowing forth, and allow the composition to allow you to enter into the composition, rather than have force it to stop and contemplate, but just receive. And that's what he wants. He wants us to receive what he has written. Mm-hmm. He still speaks to us so remarkably. He still seems a vibrant, living being through his music, and his ideas are still so relevant in terms of what it is to be a creator and what it is to be an artist.
No,
I just think he's one of, there is no, we're so lucky too that he existed for us in our art.
yes.
Kind of like Shakespeare. I put him up there in the same kind of way. He puts a lot of the building blocks. He describes them, he places them, and he gives us ideas of how to use them. And I think that almost more than anyone else, maybe Bach.
And I've just been thinking about something you said a few minutes ago when you used the word his resolve about working through the agony he was going through, knowing he was going deaf and trying to be secretive about it. I mean, I read some of his reflections where he was worried about how his enemies would react, because he says, I have plenty of them in the musical world in Vienna, but once they know I'm going deaf, what will their reaction be? And he was just horrified at, why me? And this, my great, but that he is working through this, and that this symphony, which is not agonizing to hear and doesn't show angst and anger, and it's like, how amazing that as a human being he could do that, with the resolve being made at that time in the village he was staying in, that I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to keep doing what I am intended to do. And it makes me think a little bit then too about Billy Childs and his resilience movement. I mean, there's this little bit of a theme going here of something that I think
who knew? Yes, there
is.
Yes.
Right. Because we're tired of COVID. We're all struggling in our own ways in so many things that we hadn't anticipated having to go through as a community in Anchorage together, and in the larger sense of it in our country and in the world. And so resilience and resolve are important for us to grasp onto and to make our own in our own ways. So
right. I mean, I didn't know the names of the movements or the progress of the concerto when we programmed the Second Symphony. But isn't that wonderful about music, about art, that it can take on the issues of the day and not only comment on them from the present, but also comment on them from the past. I mean, be a response from the past that seems to have meaning to us today, for us today. So it's remarkable, and it's the magic of music, isn't it? Magic of art.
Can't wait to share all of that in person. Again, so grateful we're in person and able to perform for an audience in the hall, but also invite in our online audience. It's a different world we're entering now, and we need to adapt, and we are. And I'm really proud of the orchestra, and thank you to your leadership with us this year, that we're moving forward, and we're gonna do it. We're making it.
Yes, we are. It's going to be great show this weekend, and moving onward, symphonying on,
absolutely. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for your thoughts, and look forward to being with you this week in rehearsals. And then Saturday night we have this fabulous program to present to our community and our supporters. So thank you, and carry on.
My pleasure. Thank you.